Got a new tool in the shop today. I traded in with my brother this Festool for my DeWalt plus some cash. He doesn't use this, and I told him that if you ever get rid of it, you know, let me in on it, because I don't want you to unload this thing without me, you know, knowing about it, possibly grabbing it from you. So he decided that he didn't want this anymore, and so what I told him was I would give him my one of my DeWalts and a great blade on it, one of my chop masters, and some cash, and he gave me this. So I've got a Kapex, and I've kind of always wanted one of these, but I never wanted to spend the money to buy one. Sometimes I cut stuff at the shop that's big, but most of the time it's on the job site. Now with the capacity limited on this one, I'm obviously not going to be able to cut huge crown moldings with it. So if I go to the job site, I'll still probably take the DeWalt, one of the DeWalts. And the one that I have on my actual workbench right now is the one that, you know, I kept. I gave him the one that was in my trailer, which is exactly the same. So he's got that one plus some cash. I've got this one, and I'm guessing this guy is going to go on my workbench because that's why I would have wanted it in the first place, just for more accurate cuts. This is the one that I actually just had sharpened, so that's cool. It's brand new, freshly sharpened. I don't know about what's in there, but this the Oshlin or whatever is in here right now. I don't even know what that is as far as like quality goes. I don't even know. Never used an Oshlin blade, but I think they're pretty decent. But I don't know if it's sharp or what. But all I know is my brother barely used this thing, so it's basically sat. He uses it occasionally, and that's why he's like, I shouldn't have this saw. You know, back when he got it, I talked him into getting one, but back in the day, I think he probably had a little bit more, thought he was going to use it more, but it ended up being not so much. So I think the idea of getting one was, you know, kind of cool, but at the end, it just kind of didn't make a lot of sense. But he didn't clean this off, so I think he was cutting some stuff that had some pretty good pitch on it. But I'm going to go ahead and just clean off everything because this is real dusty. And once I get done, I'm sure this thing will be nice and clean. So I'm just thinking, how is it going to fit? Is it going to fit? That guy is almost 26 inches tall. Off the bat, there are some things that I know I'm not going to like as much as the DeWalt, just right off the bat. One of them is that, you know, I really like the DeWalt light. You know, working at night or working places where you don't have a lot of light, that light on the DeWalt is really sweet. And it's just perfect. It gives you the cut line just perfectly without having to adjust it for different blades and all that stuff. And it definitely is nice because it gets pretty small, just like believe it or not, the DeWalt gets pretty compact too. This does too, but this feels a little bit more compact. This is pretty tall too, actually, now that I look at it. So that's 27 3/4 inches tall. So, all right, definitely taller than the Kapex. But when you fold this thing up here and you pull it forward, it's pretty compact as well. So this saw has been a really good saw. It doesn't cut so great squarely, you know, cutting tall base or long, deep, wide pieces. I feel like I get a little too much movement in the rails, but I'm not going to complain. It does a pretty good job, and for what it is, for the price you pay, you know, it's definitely good. And, you know, it served me well for quite a while, and it's going to serve me well even longer. You know, especially when you have nice blades and, you know, get real good cuts. But I really do like the light. But other than that, you know, I don't think I'm going to miss too much of it. So we'll see. It's got a lot of torque when you start it up, so you tend to get that, you know, pull down when you start it up. It doesn't have a real soft start. Can be jarring if you're not ready for it. But yeah, it's pretty good. Well, why don't I take this guy out of here, put the Kapex in. Now, of course, I'm going to have to adjust these. I do know that, so I'm going to unscrew those Those aren't going to fit, but we'll have to figure out what's going to fit. So let me go ahead and move this out of the way. Couple little business cards to fine tune, right? So already I can see there's a problem, and that is my dust collection shroud. You know, the DeWalt is like, it's like off center. This one is not off center, it's centered. So as it spins, as it does that, it's actually doing it nice and at a nice centered motion. But the DeWalt is not. So when you look at the dust shroud back there, it's actually a little off center, right? It's not 5 inches there and 7.5 there. So that's 2.5 inches. Instead of guessing, I'm just going to take this and I'm going to put the saw back in here and just see how it rotates. Again, just to make sure so you can see how close I am to the front there. And that's about where I was before. You can kind of see the lines at which I kind of run through. So that's about where it was before, right there. So what I also do is, this is kind of what I look at here, because when I have the fence set up and I'm doing lots of routing, I want to make sure that that miter fence is out of the way from long pieces. So if you look, you know, say I'm running this long piece and I go and potentially I could hit the fence. When I run like fluted pilasters further over, but that's not too common. And if I'm doing those, I can always change the, you know, setup. But, you know, let's say that I'm running this type of thing, right, where I'm just running lots of flutes or something, and those are plunging down. You can see what's going to happen. If my fence is in line, it's usually going to be a problem. But I do have quite a bit of room until I hit the fence, so there's that as well. But there's all sorts of things to keep in mind when you're setting up this type of a bench, and that's one of them. But also keep in mind that you can move, you know, if it's a situation where you're doing something that's a little extra long or, you know, whatever, you can always move your miter saw if you need to, because it's very rare that that happens. But especially today, doing flutes is like, it's just so uncommon now. Right there, kind of see it, right? So it's barely hitting. I'll just take all of it off and redo that whole thing. Okay, so I just thought of something. I want to check the fit on the hose and see how that fits. Seriously, it fits exactly the same way as my other. I want to make sure that it's out of the way when I don't want to use it. And if I can get this guy further back, it's going to be better for me ultimately, because it's not going to be sticking out so far. Let's say I'm cutting pieces like this and I'm setting up the stop block, but then let's say I want to move and I don't want to have the stop block there. Before, I would just go sideways and it would pass it. So nice, this is why I have it center. I don't have it in the center. I have it offset so that I can, one way it'll be retracted further in, and the other way will be out like that. I'll show you right here. Your fence needs to be out of the way of the body. So in other words, I can't have it back too far. See that? It's just going to hit that. I'm just going to bring this up so it just clears the front, and that's going to be it. Like I said, most of the time I'm using my homemade stop just because I like the, you know, everything about it. It's just so easy to set and it's really rock solid. But definitely, if you're making one of these, I would encourage you to make it off center like this so that you can rotate them and be out of the way. And you definitely want to be square, because if you're not, your pieces of wood are going to be angled, right? As you go farther. Let me go ahead and mark this, and that's going to be All right, so that's perfectly centered right there. And then on my mark, so that's where I want to be. I'm going to secure this with a screw just to temporarily put this down to the table. That way it's not going to move on me. All right, now I can make my mark with this piece solid. So just go through and rotate it. Okay, 1/4 inch, that's my spacer. So you can see my arc here, and it looks pretty good there, and putting this piece right in place, making sure it's nice and tight. And now what I can do is just take my trammel arm. I just have this little, trammel point. It's really simple. Just using the arc that I already put on there, I set the length. I put my center mark right here, which is in the center of everything, and it's also in the center of the port, exactly. So you could cut this on a router, or just do this. You could use a jigsaw, or you could use a bandsaw. I mean, whatever method you want to use. But now that's going to be just the right arc there. See the difference between the two arcs. It's pretty impressive. Well, what better tool to use than a jigsaw? I'm going to go ahead and put this in its place. I've got the pieces that were already there holding it up, and so it's not going to move. I'll just go ahead and cut this guy out. Now I could put this dust collector on even to collect the dust down there, but since I have this vacuum, it's pretty good as well. So I just don't want to coat my shop with dust cutting this little guy. All right, I'll tell you what, this thing with the dust collection on it, it's superb. Cutting the top, there's no dust at all. It drops a little bit at the bottom, but that's cool, it just drops. If I want to take a drum sander and clean it up, I mean, it's really good. Probably don't need anything. I'll put the saw in and just make sure that it's good. It's not much, but I'm hitting something. Yeah. You know what it is? It's this, the flat part in there in the middle actually clears it. It's the, you see how it's a little bit open here and it's touching here, but it's completely open down there. So you see that part? That's where I put the pencil. So I actually put the pencil in a little bit of a wrong spot. So what I'm going to do is take off about, again, so I'll cut it one more time, 3/8 of an inch off. So that's the new one. I have about 1/8 of an inch to spare. And then this guy drops down on it. What I did was I went ahead and just sanded this to clean off all the lines that were on it. So it looks a lot better. So I noticed that this piece was, because it's just floating in here, it was sawdust had gotten down there in between, and so it started to kind of lift up a little bit. And what I'm going to do is actually, rather than allowing it to just float, I'm going to drop it down with a little brad. Well, one thing's for sure, I can cover this up with white paint now that I'm not going to be having that hose, constantly going back and forth on this wall. I went ahead and put this on there and just set it down so I could get a reading right there of where the curve starts, and then I put a couple marks. So as I put my piece of wood, I want to make sure that I'm in there. And I'm just going to go back at an angle, and who knows what that angle is going to be, but like that. And I'm going to put a mark right where that is. Okay, cool. I just used something that is on the Kapex that I didn't have before. So normally I would take out my angle finder, my Starrett, but this is actually very cool, and I've never used one of these before. Obviously, I haven't had a Kapex. I took the point from the curve and making sure that I'm inside the arc. So I have a couple of my lines right there, my witness lines. So I'm inside the arc, and so I went to that point right there, and I just essentially took my piece of wood and put it all the way back to the wall, and I determined what that angle was by using this really cool, it's on the wall and it's on the line, and then what you do is just lock this down, and I can tell you just right from that, it's cool because the Starrett, the one that I normally use, doesn't have a locking knob. It's just you open it up, and that's, you get what you get. And it's friction fit, so it doesn't, it's got a nice movement. But this is pretty cool, certainly. I definitely am going to use this. And now what you do is you take this and put it on your miter saw. And since I have the Kapex sitting right here, I just went ahead and line the blade with it, and or the laser, whichever you have. In this case, I just have the blade, and I determined that was 36 degrees. Now I'm going to go check this and make sure it's the right angle. Okay, that is the right angle. So I need to make sure that this bevel is the same direction as the other one. This piece I rough cut at 13 3/4. It's just barely long enough. There's a slight flat spot. Look at that. I'm gonna go see if this is gonna fit. Angle just like that. And that needs to be a little over 3 1/4 inches, so I'm going to mark that. 3 1/4 is going to be the short point. Okay, now for the back part, I'm going to make a cut here at 30, and I'm going to make another cut at 30, and that needs to be 5 1/2 inches. And that's the 5 1/2 inches is going to be the short point. Flip this over and cut it from this side, looking at that line. Unbelievable. I got no more material left. And that's going to be like that. I'm going to do a pocket hole here. And a pocket hole here, pocket hole here. The nice thing about using 2P10 is if you want to change it, you can always break it off. It's better than using regular glue for that, and that, for that matter. Okay, now I have a piece of scrap piece of 1/4 inch. I'm just going to take this and lift this guy up, and at the same time slide this under it. It's just going to be a smaller piece so I can get it in and out easier. 6 1/2, so 3 1/4 is the middle. What I could do is square there and then do a slight different cut. Okay, I'm just going to get a little creative here. I'm going to come in off that center line, 3 1/4 inches, which is the same as this up here, and I'm going to come across at that same angle. Now I'm going to do that same 36-degree cut right there to clear that out of the way. Now I just have that last cut to make. Okay, so that's where that port is. So when I make my holes, so that when I grab this thing, I want to be able to grab it with some holes. So I'm actually going to put holes right off of that line. Okay, now those right there. So as far as the height goes, now we can go ahead and drill those holes. 2 nice holes, perfectly placed. Okay, so I just put in 2 brads right there. That holds this down. I mean, this just floats, but the pocket screws sink it in. However, I wanted to keep that front edge down because it lifted up and sawdust was getting under there. Got to put the 1/4-inch strips here. All right, it's all in. I got basically 1/4-inch shims, but I had to adjust the thickness. So I took my random orbital sander and just dropped it down a touch, and that was it. One thing I'll notice is that this thing is a lot lower to the counter, meaning that when you have this on, this distance here, height, is actually not that high. So even though I use 1/4-inch for my cover here, it actually won't go in because it's coming off this 1/4-inch piece, so there's actually a little bit of an angle. And so I'm glad that I made all those funny cuts because actually when you, I can pull it out, it just fits right in there. You can see that. I mean, you can see my hand doesn't even move. I couldn't do that with the DeWalt. So let me see what it does. I'm going to keep it right here and I'll start it again. Yeah, that's impressive. That is. Let me turn on the laser. Now the laser is pretty cool, for sure. I'll put a piece of wood there. You can see it's typical twin laser. I used to have that on my Delta a long time ago, but I always liked the light on the DeWalt. Going through the slots there, that's what determines the lines there, I guess. So they're going to move. As you move, they're going to move. But this thing slides really nice. So I haven't tested it out. I haven't done one cut. I think it's time to check out the new saw. Let's make a cut. And the blade is probably not so great. I've been spoiled. I'm used to chop masters and all that stuff, but let's check this. That is really good. Here's the kicker, man. Making sure this thing is just like right on the money. So let's check this again. Basically, I just took this big block of wood. Now, you could use longer ones, but if you get both sides good, you're good. Now also, when you use this thing, you might find some boards are warped. They might be toned down, bowed down, So as you cross this over, it might actually drop a little bit. So if you find that you're dropping down because it's bowed, that's one thing. But if you're using a straight edge like this, I mean, this is just a big block of wood. And that's jointed and all that stuff. So that is right there. Now, I took this off the blade because it was not so great. And also, this whole thing was caked with the buildup on there was pretty good, but then when I wiped it with the rag, it just came right off. So it was real easy to get to, especially if you've ever cut pine. You know what I'm talking about. The pitch that builds up on your saw blades. So this was the saw blade that I just took off. And this guy was the one that I just had sharpened. So I haven't even touched this guy. This is freshly sharpened, so this should be essentially brand new. Put this blade guard up to a certain place and then get it on. It's not a easy thing to get off. I actually had to break this out. Yeah, we don't need to do that any tighter than there. Yeah, it's plenty tight. Okay, so that's good. Just gotta close this guy up so we can cover the... It literally looks like a brand new blade guard now. Before it had a little bit of pitch on it, so that looks really good. So I unplugged it when I did all that work. Plug it back in. Let's make a cut. See how this blade cuts compared to the other one. I'll use this same wood since I have that. It's going to be a good test. So that result was pretty okay, but you know, not great. Let me see how this does. Well, that was way better. I mean, way better. And actually the dust collection might have even been better too, which is interesting. But yeah, that was really good. So, very good. A little bit of tear on the back edge, which is pretty typical. Alright, I just want to give you my first impressions on this Kapex. I have a couple of things that I learned that I'm impressed with. One is, I thought that you had to engage the blade, the power, in order to drop this thing down. I was completely wrong. You do not have to press this button, the release there, and also you do not have to engage the power. So now what you do is you just press this, you can bring it down. So I was totally wrong on that. So this actually is not so bad. The handle is, I'm getting used to it. One thing I'm not necessarily thrilled with is the blade guard, because I'm so used to be able to just lift this thing up. But you know what? Once you bring this thing down, you can lift it up as well. So it kind of gives you that ability to do it, but you do have to bring it down. So once you bring this thing down, now you have the ability. All you have to do, if you want to actually use it, is when you pull the trigger. So let's say you pull the trigger, and then so it's pulled. All you have to do is press this button, and it will actually go on. You don't have to release the trigger, and you don't have to pull this first. It just goes. So watch, I'll start it up. And did you see my hand when I had this thing on? I mean, this does not move at all. I'll do it again. You try doing that with the DeWalt. That thing goes like this. Goes, you know, whenever you shut it off, turn it on. I mean, the thing's just a wild beast. So this is a pretty impressive. The controlled torque is really good. Now the cuts. This is a thin kerf blade, and this is the Kapex blade. This was just freshly sharpened. So when I got this, I had actually already had this sharpened from Forest, you know, where I get my Forest woodworker blades. They sharpen my blade, so they actually sharpened this Kapex blade. And it cuts really well, but I did notice when I was doing my initial like cross cuts that I was getting some burning. So I'm not really sure why that happened, but I did get some. It's not a huge deal, but some of them, like this one, that was a pretty significant amount of burn. Whenever you're cutting boards like this that could potentially be not perfectly straight, in other words, they're rough sawn, you could have some crooked boards. So it probably pinched the blade as it was cutting. But after all the pieces were jointed and everything was ready to go, all of them turn out really nice. So certainly that there's no issue with the blade. But I'm used to using a full kerf blade, and I'm also used to using a chop master blade. So it's hard to say, you know, what, or the Freud industrial 96 tooth. But this one feeds really easily. It's effortless. This blade, this 60 tooth blade. The laser is pretty impressive as well, but it's not dialed in completely perfect. It's pretty close. So, and I know that as you change, and I believe as you change the your blade, because of the kerf, it's going to change. So let me put that on, and a little switch in the back. So I would actually like that switch to be more toward the front of the tool actually, but it's not. But that laser, it's really nice and fine. That's one thing I like about that thing, man. It really is narrow. So it's not like a real thick laser. I like how it's on both sides. So that's cool. You don't have to guess. But I just have to fine tune that. And again, with every blade I use, I imagine it's going to be, you know, needing to be adjusted here and there. The DeWalt system with the light, I like that a lot. The only thing is in the daytime, if you're outside, that light doesn't really help you. So although these may or may not help in the daytime, I know the light doesn't help you from the DeWalt. But at night or in the evening or in the shop, the light is phenomenal. One of my favorite things about that guy, the DeWalt. It's a 780, the DeWalt sliding 780. So when you look at the capacity, the DeWalt was about 13 3/4, and this guy is about 12 and change. So about, we'll call it 12 1/4, depending on how thick your piece is. But that's about what I'm thinking. You're going to get about 12 1/4, perhaps. So the cut capacity is not terrible on this. It's just a little bit, you know, and you could raise up the workpiece, probably get a little bit more, just like you can on the DeWalt. So if you're wanting to get just a little extra bit, you could probably raise it up, and you know, you'll get a little bit more. So the dust collection is impressive. So that's one thing I wanted to really point out. My shop is connected to a big dust collector. So I've got a big 6-inch port here, and I've got the central vac, which is basically just a really nice shop vac, but it's, you know, it's designed to be throughout the home. So it's got a really good, powerful motor on it, and it pulls pretty good. It does a pretty good job, but it's not perfect, but it does a really good job. I cut all these parts. Let me show you. For all these face frames. So everything here, rough cut and cut to size. All these parts here. And this is all that was left, right? So there's nothing here, right? If I were using my DeWalt, there would have been dust here as well. So I'm pretty impressed with the lack of dust, let's just say. And actually, when I started, this was already here. So I'm telling you, this did a really good job for dust collection. Accuracy, so far, I haven't, you know, had any reason to think this isn't going to be accurate. I just checked my square cut. I actually took out my 24-inch Starrett, number 380. So this is something that I've had for a long time. I actually took it out of the bag that it came in, because that was what I used to store it in, and it had rust. And it, you know, I can't even believe this, that it had rust on it, considering that we don't live in a area where it's got, a lot of humidity and all that stuff. The DeWalt had a lot of issues. One of them was cutting square, especially on both sides of the blade. But in fact, the DeWalt fence was very good. I mean, very good. I was pretty impressed actually when I took this 24-inch up to it. The fences are nice and coplanar. This one is very good. However, it's not perfect. I can see it is just barely. I took my feeler gauges in there, and I mean, I can get some feelers in there, but it's just not, it's not much at all. So pretty darn good. I checked for square here. That's pretty good too. And again, the DeWalt's not terrible, but it's not as good as this one, but it still was pretty good as far as square fence. The table is pretty good too. However, it's not perfect. And when you look at the table, one of the problems I had with my DeWalt is the plate here is so large on the DeWalt, and it actually, because it's so big, much bigger than this, and it's dropped down, it's not level at all with the table. When you're talking about little pieces, a lot of times it'll tip. So I just always was having a problem with that. And also the actual center part of the base, the part that moves, the turntable part, it seems like it was, quite a bit higher than the sides. So clearly the table, I mean, it kind of needs to be taller than the sides, higher. Otherwise it's hard to move with stuff on it, but you want it to be, I mean, almost dead perfect with it. If it's not just a touch bit higher. So when I took my feeler gauges on there, it was a little bit, but not much at all. So that's good. We'll see how it does. And you know what? Because the saw doesn't have as much capacity, I'm not going to be cutting my big pieces of baseboard vertical like I've always done. So that's something that I'm really going to miss. Now, of course, I've got my DeWalt right here. This guy here is what I was talking about. This, you see how big that is? I mean, it's a monster, the width of it. So, and the fact that it's so large, and it's, you can't, I mean, it's in almost as far as it goes. It's a pretty big throat plate. And unfortunately it sets down, so it quite a bit. And I'm sure there's a way to shim it up. You could probably take some tape and shim it, but it's just one of those things that I never really bothered to do. Not too bad for a, $500 saw. So I'll probably still be using the DeWalt for the job site. And plus this is I don't really want to take this out, to be honest. I don't want to worry about this. So I feel like if someone's going to steal, they're probably going to steal something like this versus the DeWalt that it seems like everybody has. You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, if I was on the job site and I needed real accuracy, the DeWalt just doesn't give it to you. It doesn't give you great accuracy. I haven't determined whether or not this does, as you go wider. The last time I made really tall, it was 10-inch or so base, and it had to be very perfect. No sanding, because it was a thermofoil. It was already thermofoiled, and it was a tall base for a kitchen island that I was wrapping, and everything was thermofoil, so it was all done already. And when I took it to the and I didn't have very much left over, so I had like no scrap. So I couldn't really make any mistakes. Well, I couldn't cut it on the DeWalt. I have two DeWalts. I could not cut them on either of them. It wouldn't give me a good result at all. So I scrapped that idea. And thankfully I was using, plywood as my test cuts. But then I changed it to my table saw, my cabinet saw, and cut everything in the shop with my ink reminder gauge, and dialed in, seriously. That gave me great results. No filler, no nothing, perfect results. You put that thing up and it's thermofoil, you go miter around a base. I mean, you know what it's like. It is difficult to do. And so each piece was about 5.5 inches or so. So it definitely was a struggle. I don't know if this could do that, but I think we have a much better chance of this doing it than the DeWalt. Anybody who has had a miter saw, built pretty much for the everyday contractor, knows how useless these guys are, these clamps. So if you have a material clamp and you've got a DeWalt or something like it, you know how much of a pain they are to use. And just basically nobody uses them, right? So when I saw this, I couldn't believe how simple this is and how nice it is. So right off the bat, there's one thing to note. You have to turn it this way in order to release it. So if you have this and you don't know how to do that, well, that's what you do. Plus you have to have this thing raised up in order to do that, because if you drop it down, it hits the fence. So any case, this is a phenomenally simple tool. You just push it down and look at how nice that works, right? I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. And look at this. That's it. It's done. I mean, you don't get any better than that. And I just cannot believe how simple this is. So if there's anything that surprised me, it was this guy. And I will tell you that I just am blown away. And then you can just release it. And I feel like every clamp should be like this, but no clamps are like that. So, I just wanted to bring this to, anybody's attention who's looking at this and just wondering, what else is there to this saw that people don't know? That's one of the things I had no idea about. I was very impressed. And the fact that it presses straight down, it doesn't shift the material. So you can see, I'm just doing this one-handed, and you can watch this piece and see if it shifts as I push this down. Look at that. Nothing moved. That is impressive. There's no twist, there's no pressure out, there's no pressure in. It just pulls it straight down. That is great. Okay, I've got this countertop, and this is 18.25 inch deep. The ends need to be trimmed. This piece is 97 inches long, right, from the factory. So I need it 96 inches for the total job, which means I have to cut a 1/2 inch on each side. Well, I can't really do that very effectively because of the length and it's thick. On the table saw, the sled, it's not very good to do that. Cut just a tiny bit off such a big, heavy piece. Now with the Festool, I noticed that I was able to cut all my parts for like the doors and stuff, and I noticed that it was square on both sides. The DeWalt would not have been angle. Even though the first part I cut was square, the other one wasn't square. So that saw, you know what, and I'm going to say that saw, but I have two DeWalts and they're both the same. And I had two chop saws before that were the same as well. My old Makita LS1013, that was the same. So this is something that I haven't ever been able to do. And I think that's just because the Kapex is actually really accurate. So I'm pretty excited about that. But on that same note, I'm actually going to try this and see, because of that, it should be able to cut this really nicely from both sides, flip it over, trim both ends. Okay, this is what I'm talking about. So before, with my DeWalts and all the other saws, if I make this cut, let's say this is a 2-inch piece, after I squared up one end, move it, cut it to length, and now I want to use this piece, move it over here, cut it to the same length or whatever. I haven't been able to do that because what happens is I cut this part to length. This part over here wasn't square. This one was square, but this one is not square. I mean, this has happened forever. When I did all my parts for the doors, everything was square on that second cut there, on the off cut, that was square. So I just shifted it over, cut it, shifted over, cut it. It eliminated that double cutting. It actually saved quite a bit of time and material. It's good. However, can it do this where you flip it over and do it? Theoretically, yes. Depending on this back edge, if it's hopefully parallel, everything should be this, good. It was ripped, but you never know. But we'll try it. So I'll cut a little bit here, flip this piece over, cut it. If I can do it, that'll be awesome. Okay, well, that's actually pretty impressive. And you know what? I'll have to say some of it's my issue. The first cut, I didn't, because these lasers aren't perfectly aligned. I haven't done that on this saw yet. It's a little bit off, so I'm just still getting used to them. So the second cut I did, I basically went down and I tried to get it as close to this as possible, but I ended up cutting it just barely. I mean, that's not much at all. But here's the thing. I mean, this is impressive, and it is dead square. Put this up, and it is right there. Look at that. That is absolutely perfect. That is impressive. So, okay, that blows away the DeWalt. There's absolutely no way I could have gotten that from my DeWalt. So far, I have to say this is it's better than the DeWalt. Not talking about capacity, I'm just talking about accuracy. So if this is the kind of stuff you want to do, you need accuracy like this, I would say just get one of these. If you're not needing to cut huge pieces of molding all the time, this makes a lot of sense. All right, now, because I didn't cut this with a stop, that helped. This is going to be the real trick, to see if I put this on a stop, and when I flip it over, if it's perfect. That's going to be the real one. I want to show you something. Okay, so you can see just barely there's a lip right there. Now, I was thinking this was going to be a problem, and that is because my lip here, remember I said it's just a minor lip, but it is a lip. That guy right there, because you can see how it doesn't have a lip here, and I registered off the first cut here with this, but because that piece is actually a little bit longer, it affects down here. So when I cut this guy, that lip right there, I need to pull this piece towards me in order to accommodate that, which makes sense, right? Okay, let's check the squareness of this cut and see what's what here. Gosh, man, that is just money. Unbelievable. I'm impressed. I am absolutely impressed. This Starrett square, reading this thing absolutely perfectly square after doing a double cut like that. Festool right now is looking pretty good. Looking pretty good. Definitely I'm happy I made that buy. Well, guess what I forgot about? My crown molding jig. Because this is centered, my crown molding jig is off center, and therefore my slots to attach to the countertop are not right. It's shifted over. So, man, oh man, I completely forgot about this. This guy is going to be hitting, essentially every time you push this down, it's going to be hitting the molding, and then it will fold in, obviously, after you make the cut. But see how that is? So it's either that or you just remove it. This guy right here. So if you remove this, then it doesn't seem like it's going to be a problem as far as the dropping it, the thing. And then of course this goes up as you do it. This is a 4 5/8 cove, but it's actually 1 1/4 inch thick, or 1 1/8 inch thick. So it's actually a pretty thick piece, but 4 5/8. You can't see this cut. The laser doesn't show up on there. That's not good. I'm not, there's a few things that I'm not too thrilled about. So when you put it in the special cutting position, you pull this little lever down and it engages the saw. Now here's the thing. This thing obviously is in the way, but notice what you don't see. You don't see that laser on the crown molding at the top. That's not good. The first few cuts I made without that shroud, I put it back on because I got rid of this cutting position. I decided to just put it back normally so I could get the saw to be up above on top of here so I could see the laser. So I actually just, went back to the normal cutting, and you can see, now you can see it up there. So, clearly that's an issue. The other thing is that when you're cutting, because of the guard, because of those little slots in the guard, it's like the laser is appearing and then it doesn't appear, and then it appears and then it doesn't appear. So, and I know that's kind of the way that all guards are. They're slotted like that, and I get that, but it's kind of annoying to have to deal with that. So I was able to put the shroud back on. I got rid of that cutting position and just kind of moved the saw myself rather than having the saw do the work. I actually just moved it to the position after I got it going so that it maxed out that cutting. And it did cut this, no problem. I mean, I didn't hit anything. So it's pretty impressive that it can do that. But, you know, according to some people, they've cut, you know, 6.5 inch. I've even heard some people say closer to 7, which I can't even believe that. I guess it all depends on the nesting of it. Maybe it was a particularly low crown molding and not so tall. All right, well, I just wanted to show this. This is the first time I'm using this to cut crown for a job. And I mean, just trying to get used to it, you know, getting rid of that cutting position. I think that's one of the biggest things. And dealing with the laser and how it's kind of spotty there. Just, you know, dealing with that. It's, you know, we'll get through it. The key is just to start big and then work your way down to the number. I mean, that's the way I would typically do it anyways. I just don't have the same visual. The visual is a little bit different on this saw than it was on the DeWalt. All right.